On March 10th at 9:34 a.m., we had the conference call with it, and it was opened with an inspirational quote from the Shiva Star. There were no minutes read at that particular meeting. Dipelsha spoke of the platform and the mission of the organization, as well as the difference between our 501c3 organization and our 501c4 organization. Delicia went over the the legislative priorities for 2018, which included more training, crisis intervention, bias training, more oversight of law enforcement agencies and officials, and the intersection of poverty and law enforcement, as well as de-escalation training. We are monitoring a few bills across the nation, including bills in Maryland, New Jersey, Georgia, Louisiana, and New York. Kamari spoke about the Noble workshops that will be going on throughout the country in various places, including D.C., Atlanta, Staten Island, Long Island, Dallas, Houston, Baton Rouge, Columbus, Georgia. Noble is the National Organization for Blacks in Law Enforcement. They are now an official partner of Moms of Black Boys United, and it'll be a great opportunity for all of us. She also introduced Kim and Nicole, who spoke about Autism Awareness Campaign for the month of April, and which was launched on April 2nd, 2018. And the goal of the Autism Awareness Campaign is to increase awareness and educate moms on the definition, diagnosis, and behaviors of autism. Dr. Nicole Anthony, who is an expert in autism, on the autism spectrum, will be on one of our monthly calls to discuss autism. Our guest speaker for the month of March was Dr. Kevin Booker, who is a trauma specialist and healer who has over 20 years experience of forensic and criminal profile experience. He dealt mostly with post-combat debriefing for men and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and he worked full-time for the Veteran Affairs. He spoke with us about fear and trauma and why we should practice and specialize in fear and trauma, especially for our younger boys who are traumatized by many issues related to them being black and male. He also talked about what is fear, what is normal fear, and what is abnormal fear, and also some of the trauma, fear-related disorders like PTSD, anxiety, emotional, repression, as well as giving us information and resources that we can attach ourselves to and access, particularly the Association for Black Psychologists. Gave us tips on how to teach our boys and our children about police encounters and what we should tell them, including things like validating that they are right about their assessment of what they feel or what they think or what they observe when they interact with police officers. Also to let them know that police officers are afraid just like we are, despite what they claim. And yes, some police officers do racially profile, and some are prejudiced, and some are racist, and some are envious of your success, and some are hot-headed, and some are trigger-happy. These are the things he suggested that we explain to our kids, especially our boys, when we talk about interaction with police. There's Q&A. Afterwards, closing remarks, and then a closing prayer by Shiva Star, and the conference call ended at 11:07 a.m. And those are the minutes for March 10th, 2018. Thank you, ladies.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi.
I'm so sorry. I was on mute. I've been talking for a long time. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me start over. So I went over our purpose and mission, which is twofold: Moms of Black Boys United, a 501c3, which provides information and support for moms of black sons and promotes positive images of black boys and men, and Mob United for Social Change, our C4 advocacy organization, which focuses on influencing policies that impact how black boys and men are treated by law enforcement and in society. And I had just given quite a lengthy overview of just what's happened since the last time we were on this call a month ago. 2 additional black males have been killed by police in the news. 22-year-old Stephen Clark in Sacramento, California, was in his own family's backyard and holding a cell phone and was killed by police. They fired 20 rounds, and 8 of them hit him, most of them in the back, even though they said he was coming toward them with a weapon, which was actually a cell phone. And also here in Brooklyn on April 4th, which is the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination, 34-year-old Saheed Vassell was killed while holding a metal pipe that they said he pointed at them like a weapon. He was mentally ill, a Jamaican immigrant living in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and someone called in to say they had a weapon, which was actually a pipe, and they shot him pretty much instantly. So our work continues to be cut out for us. Also, just this week, a 14-year-old boy who missed the bus to school in Rochester Hills, Michigan, after missing the bus, tried to figure out how to walk to school and got lost, so he stopped at a neighbor's house to ask for help, and instead of offering him help, they saw him as an immediate threat and shot him. So this is the perception of black males in America, unfortunately, and we need all of us to band together to try to counter that and to try to stop these incidents from happening, because it doesn't seem to be going away. So with that, I will just go over our 5-point approach. Number 1 is to influence policy. Number 2, change perception. Number 3, to demonstrate our power politically and economically. Number 4, to partner strategically with others who are focused on the same goals. And number 5, promote self-care. So with that, I will turn it over to Kamari, who will talk more about our partnership with Noble. And Kamari, don't forget to unmute yourself. Start there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Hi, how are you, ladies? Good morning. We have partnered with Noble, as Tammy mentioned during the minutes, and we currently have a few seminars that have been scheduled, and we have some that are tentative. Our partnership with Noble is extremely exciting because a lot of moms have been mentioning that they wanted to bring things into their area because they want to make sure that their police departments and parents in their communities are aware of what they can do, what their rights are, and what their sons can do to stay alive. So this partnership with Noble is extremely important. So far we have seminars scheduled in D.C. for May 19th with Melissa Clark. We have Atlanta with Patty Garrett, June 9th. We also have Dallas with Peggy Bruns, and we have L.A. with Vanessa on June 2nd. I think that the one in Dallas is still tentative. Columbus, Georgia is June 2nd. Long Island, New York is also tentative. And we also have one in Houston that's tentative and one in Highland Park, New Jersey that's tentative. So we have been trying to make sure that we're getting them all over the country. So if you guys are still interested in doing a Noble event, please contact me at education@mobunited.org so that we can possibly speak and let you know how we're going to put these together. We're going to be sending out soon a template of what will be discussed during these meetings so that we're uniform to make sure that we're always putting forth the mission as well as staying on task and everyone giving out the same information. I also want to make sure that I mention that there will be a live reading next Sunday at 7. I know that we've been doing them every month, and I'm so grateful that you guys have been participating. A lot of the authors have been extremely grateful that the moms are getting on. They're asking questions. They're talking. And it's also creating a little buzz on the feed in reference to what we're doing. So this next Sunday we'll be having Corey Richardson, and he'll be reading from his ebook, We Used to Have Money, Now We Have You. A Dad's Bedtime Story. So that will be, actually it's this Sunday the 22nd at 7 p.m. So I'm hoping that you guys will join us. No, I'm sorry, it's next Sunday the 22nd at 7 p.m. So I'm hoping that you guys will join the Facebook Live reading. There will be giveaways during the Facebook Live reading if you join and you start to respond. And thank you so much. And if you have any questions for me, I'm in education@mobunited.org or mobconnections@mobunited.org. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Kamari. So if you didn't hear your city and are interested in hosting a Noble seminar, just follow up with Kamari to discuss it. But for now, we're starting with cities where we have budding chapter leaders. So up next, fundraising. I just want to give a quick update. We had our first fundraising event last weekend, and it was actually my belated birthday celebration. I don't really like having parties just to celebrate myself, so I wanted to make it something of meaning. So 6 months ago on my actual birthday, I kicked off a Facebook fundraiser to try to raise money for Mob United. And through the Facebook fundraiser and our online Giving Tuesday campaign, I raised about $4,000. And then through this event, which was held in Brooklyn last weekend, I raised about $6,000 when you combined it with people who attended the event and people who couldn't attend but donated anyway. And it was just a wonderful event because we had, one, a great turnout, but also several performers. So we had performances from a group of girls called Girl Be Heard, but they did pieces, spoken word pieces that were relevant to our mission, one called Black Boy, and the other one was a tribute to mothers. And then we also had Tony Blackman, who is a renowned MC who was actually the first hip-hop ambassador for the U.S. in the State Department, and she performed an original piece that she created. And the interesting thing about her, I asked her to do it a while back. I know her from Howard. So she was preparing to perform for weeks, but then in preparation for the event, Saheed Vassell, who I mentioned in Brooklyn, was killed, and she actually lives on the block in Brooklyn where he was killed. So after that and just experiencing everything with the neighbors and talking to mothers in the neighborhood, she rearranged her whole piece for the event, and it was just very moving and impactful. And, you know, a lot of people who aren't directly connected to our message got to hear about it and will hopefully continue to support and spread the word. So we would like to do more of that. If you'd like to host a fundraiser, we encourage you to do so. This is, you know, the funds that we raise are what we use to pay for the Noble seminars and our general operating expenses, and whenever we are set up at events to promote our message and our image campaigns, et cetera. So just wanted to give an update on that, but it was overall a very fun and successful event. So with that, I think we are done with organizational updates, and we want to introduce our speakers. So Vanessa, would you like to tell everyone about our speaker this morning?
Hi, good morning, everyone. We would like to have our speaker, Dr. Nicole Anthony, join us this morning. She'll be sharing a presentation on protecting our Black sons with autism. Unfortunately, I'm having some technical difficulties this morning and can't pull up her full bio, but Nicole, please, when you join us, if you could please share a little bit about yourself before diving into the presentation, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
So welcome to Dr. Nicole Anthony. And Nicole, don't forget to unmute yourself by dialing *6. Nicole, are you on? Kim, are you still on?
I'm on. Good morning. This is Kimberly.
Can you Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay. I had to hang up and call back. I love technology.
Oh, okay. Oh, boy.
Okay, so tell you a
So
little
did
bit
you hear
about
the
myself.
intro?
Let's see, I've been in the field of education over 17 years. Currently, I am an assistant professor of special education at Fayetteville State University. I'm also a founding member of the National African American Autism Community Network and also of Elijah's Place, which is dedicated to making sure parents know their rights when they go to the school and try to work with them on matters related to their child's IEP. But I'm going to leave all those other highlights. The one I want to point out the most is the fact that I'm a mom of 3 boys. My oldest son, Elijah, who was diagnosed with autism, and now newly diagnosed, my son, Gabriel, who is 12. So that's just a little bit about myself. I'm positive Vanessa will post my full bio. But actually, they're the reasons why I'm here. So I'm going to leave you in particular with that particular picture of me, leaving you with the idea or knowing that I have 2 sons on the spectrum. All right, so let's begin. Protecting our Black sons with autism. Okay, let's go to the second slide, Vanessa. Okay, she's muted. Autism. Autism doesn't have a particular look. The disorder isn't like Angelman syndrome or Down syndrome, although some children with Down syndrome are also diagnosed with autism. Many of our children look like their typical peers. That's why I have all these pictures up there of children playing, laughing, enjoying time with their friends. And like I said, many of our children look just like their typical peers. You can't see me, but I'm putting up my fingers using air quotes over the words typical, because who really determines what is typical? Typical is what society says it is. But we'll talk more about that later, and we're going to talk about social competence in our children. Many of our children with autism run, play, jump, they enjoy themselves, and they look like everyone else. However, what sets them apart are their communication patterns and unusual behaviors. Differences in communication patterns and behaviors can impact how our children are viewed by the community and especially law enforcement. So for today, for the sake of our sons with autism, I'm not going to do an overview or a presentation. I research all the time, I lecture all the time, I present all the time. But instead of making this a presentation, I want this to be more like a conversation, an honest conversation about the disorder and how we can protect our sons as they venture out in the world. Vanessa, could you please advance to the next slide? So looking at the overview, first, I want to protect our sons through education. Autism is a relatively new term. In fact, the first person diagnosed with autism is still alive and only 84 years old. This man is 84 years old, Donald Triplett. He lives in Mississippi. And we've learned a lot over the past 84 years, and there's been a proliferation, so much research done in the area of autism. However, there are still so many unknowns. That's why we need to educate ourselves about the characteristics and deficits associated with the disorder. The second way we can protect our sons is through advocacy for the right treatment at the right time. Approximately 50,000 children with autism will turn 18 this year, and they want the same things other young adults want. They want to be able to live out on their own. They want to gain employment. They want to have relationships and get married. They want to be full participating members in society. And our children are capable of living full lives if they are provided with the training and support necessary to be successful. They need us to advocate for different services during IEP meetings and support for when they're out in the community. The final way we are going to protect our sons is through safety precautions. Because many of our children look like everyone else, they are subjected to the same interactions with community members and police officers. We have to take certain precautions to keep our sons safe. So let's begin with the educational portion of this conversation. Next slide. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects how our children think and process sensory information. It also affects how our children behave and communicate in social situations. In the United States, approximately 1 in 68 children and 1 in 42 boys have an autism spectrum disorder. According to the CDC, New Jersey, and if you live in New Jersey, here's a fact for you. New Jersey has the highest rate of autism out of any state in the nation, with 1 in 41 children diagnosed. In comparison to Down syndrome and cerebral palsy, autism is the fastest growing developmental disability in the United States. Next slide. Autism can sometimes be detected at 18 months or younger. However, many children are diagnosed at around 4 years old. Research has determined that African American children in particular may be diagnosed as much as 18 to 24 months later than their white counterparts. As I listened to the lives, the Facebook Lives, we have some parents who children were diagnosed at the age of 10, at the age of 9. My own son, Gabriel, was diagnosed at the age of 12. And Eli, he was diagnosed at 12 or 13 himself. But he did receive early intervention services because he was preemie. Both of my boys received early intervention services. When a child receives a diagnosis after the age of 3, he misses out on early intervention services. Early intervention services can include speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and up to 40 hours a week of ABA services for free. And I emphasize the word free because many times certain services at a certain age you have to pay for through your insurance or out of pocket. ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. ABA is a common behavioral intervention used with children with autism. Early intervention services are critical to success later on in life. Our brains are malleable before that age of 5, and we try to create certain pathways to help our children function out in society. And they have intensive ABA services to create certain neural pathways and behaviors through repetition so that our children can use these skills and apply them in different settings. So those ABA services early on are key. Next slide. Autism is truly a spectrum disorder. The spectrum encompasses children with varying abilities and talents. On one end of the spectrum, we have sons who are historians, mathematicians, musicians, scientists, artists, and computer geniuses. On the other end, we have sons who may require more intensive support with daily living skills. Some of our children may be nonverbal. And like I said, we have others who are little professors, and they are brutally honest. Then we have children who are sitting somewhere in between. These children have amazing talents, but still might need assistance with tying their shoes or brushing their teeth. No two people with autism are alike. And that's why I like on this slide where it says, Once you've met one person with autism, you've truly met one person with autism. Next slide. No one knows the exact cause of autism. Research indicates that genes can act together with influences from the environment to affect development in ways that lead to autism. Some risk factors for autism are: if you have one child with autism, then you have between a 0 and 33% chance of having another child with autism, hence my son Gabriel. Having older parents. Couples who are in their 40s and have children are more at risk as well. And premature babies weighing less than 4.5 pounds at birth are 5 times more likely to have an ASD. So, in my situation, both of my boys were premature. Eli was born at 24 weeks. He weighed 1 pound 6 ounces. Gabriel was born at 30 weeks, and he weighed 3 pounds 5 ounces. Eli, who was born at 1 pound 6 ounces, had a brain bleed on the left side of his brain, and that was a grade 4. And then on the right side of his brain, he had a grade 2 bleed. Once the blood subsided, cysts developed. And once the cysts dissolved, he was left with spaces in his brain. So the neural pathways had to reconnect themselves. And our neural pathways, they help us with the way we talk, walk, our motor functions. And we strengthen those neural pathways through repetition. So for him, it was pretty easy for me to see why he was diagnosed with autism, although late. He was first diagnosed with a developmental disability. But yes, it was clear to me how he moved from the NICU and how he progressed in the pathway to autism. Next slide. Autism is a spectrum disorder characterized by a diet of core deficits. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, there are 2 core characteristics. Before there were 3. Social communication deficits and restrictive and repetitive movements and interests. We're going to look at in the next slide the comorbid conditions that may exist along with sensory processing disorders. Next slide. So you see here in the center circle, I have the 2 core characteristics of autism: social communication deficit and also restrictive and repetitive interests. Now, those are the core characteristics, but you can have many of these co-conditions existing in one child at the same time. Like, you can have a child, of course, with the social communication deficit and also the repetitive interest, but also sleep disturbances are common in children with autism. So is gastrointestinal disorders. These gastrointestinal disorders can make a child irritable and have meltdowns. And from those meltdowns, possibly, if they have a difficult time paying attention, might have ADHD. So there are many different combinations that can occur within one child with autism. And all of these different combinations are affecting their communication and their behaviors. Next slide. Infants gain an understanding of their environment by watching and interacting with others. I want you to think back to when your children were infants. Joint attention is the ability to engage others and communicate socially. using nonverbal cues. When our children were infants, they pointed or they smiled. They made eye contact with us to let us know that they're enjoying our company, they're enjoying the world around them. Joint attention is critical to language and social development. From infants, some children with autism might not have those same responses to us talking to them, to us smiling at them. They may avoid eye contact with us. They might not even respond to their name. And many times, as they get older, people with autism find social interactions quite difficult. And it's because earlier on, they didn't engage in those activities to help them understand the social setting and those cues and rules associated with socializing. Next slide. As our children get older, some of them rarely enjoy sharing enjoyment of objects or activities with people. They have difficulties with that back and forth conversation. If you've had a conversation with a child with autism, at times, because communication is complex, you have to wait for someone to initiate the conversation, then you have to respond, then that person has to take a turn. And sometimes a child with autism might not even be interested in that conversation, or they might perseverate or stay on a topic of their own interest, and they don't have that ability or is impaired to have that back and forth within a conversation. For my son, his favorite topic, and this is Eli, my oldest, his favorite topic, and it's been since he was a little kid, since he was maybe 3 or 4, Batman superheroes. So he can talk your ear off about superheroes nonstop. But he's learned that if I give him a certain look, and if I might sink my shoulders a little bit, or if I'm looking like I'm really not paying attention, if I'm looking away, he'll say something like, okay, Mom, I'll come back. Maybe you don't want to talk about this right now. And I'll let him know, yes, can we talk about it later? So he's learned how to respond in those situations when he's talking about his favorite topic at length. And some of our children still need to learn that. They need to understand different forms of body language. Turn the page. Excuse me. Next slide. Individuals with ASD may not understand, like I said, body language. And like I said, communication is complex. It's a mixture of verbal and nonverbal patterns of behavior, like body language. Nonverbal communication, like rolling of eyes, raising eyebrows, shrugs, or hand signals. And not understanding these nonverbal communications and body language goes back to joint attention. If your child, in the beginning as an infant, is not paying attention to what is happening around them, or if they are hyper-focused on possibly objects and particular parts of objects, then they're missing that hidden curriculum that really isn't taught. And that hidden curriculum is those social cues and rules that are unspoken in society. They're missing that, for instance, when you are in the library, what do you know to do? You know from when you were young, if you started talking loud in the library, people asked you to be quiet. So you learned that now when I go to the library, I need to be quiet. Children with autism might not be able to modulate their voice or their tone, so they might be loud all the time, not knowing that in this particular place I need to be quiet, and in this particular place I can be loud. Some of our children with autism, some of them don't understand another person's point of view or being unable to predict or understand other people's actions because they might be so involved in what they're doing, interactions with others, and their responses to them might be a little foreign. For instance, I'll give you an example. Gabriel, who was 12, recently diagnosed, he was on a basketball team. And, you know, I wanted to keep him active. We have to keep our children active and interacting with their quote-unquote typical peers. He made a shot. And, you know, the kids are screaming and making all the noise, yay, yay, yay. And one of the boys tried to give him a high five. And Gabriel, because he didn't anticipate that particular action, he moved out the way like, what? What are you trying to do? And the little boy told him, I'm just trying to give you a high five. And even with that explanation, Gabriel still didn't want it. That was unexpected. Our children appreciate and adhere to routine. And when their routines are disturbed, and we'll talk more about restrictive and repetitive interest, it can cause a meltdown or several meltdowns. Next slide. Let's talk about restrictive and repetitive movements and interests. Many individuals with ASD engage in repetitive movements or unusual behaviors. All behaviors have a purpose. I know at this point in time, if you have a child on the spectrum and they're younger, you're thinking to yourself, why are you flapping your arms? Why are you rocking from side to side? Why are you twirling in a circle? Now, some of these behaviors are more predictable than others due to the consequences attached to them. The flapping of the arms, rocking from side to side, twirling in a circle, watching the wheel spin are all responses to something. The stimming can be a response to a sensory or to sensory information, feelings of happiness, discomfort. As I said before, all behaviors have some sort of purpose, and it's for you as the parent, and if you have a behavioral therapist working with you, to figure out the purpose of these behaviors and to possibly program in replacement behaviors. Next slide. Some of our children repeat or have unusual behaviors like echolalia. That's the repeating of things that they've heard. You have delayed echolalia and immediate echolalia. So if they're watching a cartoon, they might immediately say one of the things from the cartoon. Or, you know, as a teacher, you might hear, or I've heard later on during the day, a child saying something like, "You're going to get yours, rabbit." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, he might have watched Bugs Bunny yesterday. Got it. But even in that, that's a form of communication for some children. Some of our children have a lasting or intense interest in certain topics, such as numbers, details, or facts. And even with that intense interest, we can use that to steer them in a direction as far as their career path. Like I said, we have some children who are mathematicians. They use that intense interest in numbers. Or for Gabriel, history. He wants to be a lawyer. And I find that to be one of his strengths. We can use that intense interest to, again, carve out a career path for them later on in life. Some of our children have overly focused interests, such as moving objects or parts. And if that is one of your child's interests, possibly you can shape it or reshape that interest or possibly find a replacement behavior. I said it before that our children can get upset by slight changes in the routine. Routines are a way for our children to be able to, it's a way for them to be able to have an understanding of their environment. Those routines help them feel safe. And when these routines are disturbed, some of our children can have meltdowns. Next slide. Let's talk about sensory processing disorders. As I said before, we have our two core deficits, and we can also have a child with sensory processing disorder. We are constantly bombarded with sensory information on a daily basis, from the lights in our room, from the sun, through smells, through different food textures and tastes, through sirens, through different textures that we might feel. We are constantly bombarded with different sensory information, and we deal with it. We're able to process it. But some of our children with autism are unable to process it. They're unable to process the information, the sensory information in our environment. And that's where we're seeing some of these meltdowns. And not only with the five senses, next slide, but also through their body movements, our proprioceptive system and our vestibular system, which is in our inner ear, and it controls our balance. And it detects how we move our head. And you'll see some children with autism, how their posture may be slumped, or they have lower issues with poor posture control, or they might also walk like they're drunk because they can't catch their balance. So we have, again, all of this happening to our children at one time. And it can cause them to be either hypersensitive, next slide, hypersensitive to sensory information, or hyposensitive, undersensitive to sensory information. So some children, if they are hypersensitive to sound, they might cover their ears and they might need noise cancelers. If you have children who are hyposensitive to, if they have a visual hyposensitivity, they're the children who are sitting on top of the TV, well, not on top, but really, really close. Or when they're reading, they're holding the book really, really close to them. And they're seeking out that sensory stimulation, while other children avoid it because it actually, in a way, affects them to the point where they want to get away. Here's a story about Gabriel before we move to the next slide. Gabriel, from young, although Gabriel received his diagnosis at the age of 12, I always knew that Gabriel was on the spectrum because he was very hypersensitive to sound. When he was around 2 or 3, and he would have these serious meltdowns. Meltdowns are different from tantrums. Tantrums are used to get something. Meltdowns are responses to sensory information. So one day I needed to go get some milk from a Kmart. And, I was a little concerned because I didn't have anyone to babysit the children while I went to the store. So I said, I'm going to venture out, and we're going to go get this milk. At this point, I'm desperate. We don't have any milk in the house. So I strapped everyone in, and Gabriel was fine. He had his little toy. with him. He was fine getting in the car. We got to Kmart, trying to look for a shopping cart to put him in. He immediately had a meltdown. Too much thin information. And that meltdown was so severe, I couldn't even find a cart at that point. My mission was to just get that milk and leave. All these feelings of embarrassment start to well up, but I was determined to get that milk. This gentleman in Kmart started following us around because I have Gabriel who's screaming and hollering, and I'm pretty much dragging him along because he's heavy. He's dropped his weight. And when I say by dropped his weight, it's almost like dead weight at this point because he has this meltdown. And my other son, Mark, on the other hand, Eli is behind us. And this man is behind us as well. And I'm just like, all I need to do is just get this milk. I'm just trying to get this milk. And he's screaming, he's hollering, and the man is following us, and I'm completely embarrassed. But we get through the experience. And in that moment, I had to figure out how to desensitize Gabriel to certain sensory stimuli. So I didn't stop taking him out. I took him outside more. And from those experiences, now some doctors might suggest that, okay, putting our children in these adverse situations might adversely affect them in a way. But for me, I was desperate, and this is what I did as a mom of a child with an ASD. I took him out, and I continue to take him out. And now Gabriel, at the age of 12, he's at the mall. He is playing on a basketball team. He loves soccer. He's out enjoying the environment. And that's what I did as a mom. Does he have some sensitivity still? Yes. So with his food, and some children might have that as well. Some of your children might have that as well. Food sensitivities, like he has to smell everything before he eats it, and he doesn't like for his food to touch. And that's fine. So he'll have 3 separate plates, one for his meat, one for his vegetables, and another for his condiments, whatever it might be. And I'm fine with that, as long as he cleans the dishes. Our children might have a sensitivity to crunchy foods or might want softer foods, and that's something you can decide and introduce at a later time is if your child has a food sensitivity. So that ends our portion of education. Now, I'm not too sure if you can do this or not, but I'd like to, because honestly, I don't like talking to myself. But if everyone could take their phones off mute and say this with me. Okay. Thank you. I hear one person. And I hear another person. I am my son's first advocate.
First advocate.
No one can love him more than me. You can place yourselves back on mute. Thank you. I work with parents often, and I have them recite that little mantra before we head into IEP meetings, because through Elijah's Place, I support parents during IEP meetings. And I have them say that because when you're sitting around the table with people who are considered to be experts or professionals, sometimes it can be a little intimidating. But I always want them to understand that you are your child's first advocate. You are an expert in your child. No one can love your child more than you. So they might have all the degrees, but you have a degree in raising your son. Next slide. And the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is a federal law that guarantees or requires schools to serve the educational needs of eligible children with disabilities. And through IDEA, if you have a child who is attending school and who has an IEP, IDEA guarantees that your child has a free and appropriate education, and it gives you a voice in IEP meetings. IDEA covers children from birth through high school graduation or age of 21. If you believe your child, next slide, if you believe your child has a disability, then you can write a letter to the school saying that I suspect my child has a disability because he is displaying certain behaviors or he's falling behind academically. You have the right to a comprehensive evaluation, and that's through different evaluations like a psychoeducational evaluation, speech and OT, a functional behavioral assessment, if behavior is an issue, classroom observations. And I don't mean just one classroom observation. I mean classroom observations across settings, because sometimes our children, they act differently from one classroom to another. And also, if you think it might be autism, you can also ask for behavioral checklists and rating scales like the CARS and GARS, the Gilliam Autism Rating Scale, or the ADOS, the Autism Diagnostic and Observational Schedule. If you have a child who already has an IEP, you have the right to ask for additional testing. Our children change as they get older, especially once they get into that middle school and they start to mature, and also puberty. So you might see different behaviors at different times, and that's for you to ask for a functional behavioral assessment. Next slide. Begin transition as early as possible. The law doesn't require that you start that transition process until 16, but you can start planning as early as 14. Think about, and when I think about transition planning, I think about that saying, begin with the end in mind. What is your child's interest? What do you see him doing? Talk to your child. What are his plans for the future? And that's what you're bringing to the table. And you want to make sure that they are doing a lot of vocational assessments, educational assessments, to see where your son, how they can support your son out in the community. And I'm mentioning transition because there was a study, a national longitudinal transitional study, where Shattuck and his colleagues found that over half of African-American young adults with ASD, ages 19 to 24 years old, were not involved in leisure activities, post-secondary education, and employment more than 2 years after graduating in high school. Our children do not have to sit at home after high school. They don't have to fall off of this cliff. They just don't. They can be active, participating members in society. And if they are going to be active and participating members in society, then we need to put some safety precautions in place. Next slide. And let's talk about safety precautions. I have 3 pictures here. You might recognize one of the children, Avante Aquindo. These are the faces of children who were, and this is a somber point, but it's more of a realization for us, that some of our children wander. Avante, in 2014, on a normal day, he was at school in Queens, New York, and he was with his class. He just, something within the environment stimulated him, and he darted out of school, right past security guards, right through school door, and darted out. They searched and searched for Avante, couldn't find him until he was found months later, during the month of January. They found his remains in the East River. Shaniqua And Trey, just within the past month, went missing. Trey in New York left his school. Shaniqua, I don't know if she made a wrong turn, leaving work, but both of them were found in rivers. Elopement is serious for our children. That wandering is very serious. We have to keep our children safe. And I'm not talking about marriage or leaving to be in love with another. I'm not talking about that. Next slide. Wandering, also called elopement, is an important safety issue that affects some of people with disabilities and families in the community. Roughly half of children with ASD attempt to elope from a safe environment. They're leaving hospitals, homes, safety facilities, psychiatric hospitals without permission. Next slide. Now, for the reasons for elopement or wandering, we're still trying to figure it out. And it could be due to the enjoyment of running, that lack of fear, and just wanting to run and explore. They might want to get to a place he or she enjoys, like a pond, or to get out of a situation. Maybe it's too much sensory information coming at them at one time, and they're trying to avoid that sensory stimuli. Or they just want to go and see something interesting, or their particular interest, whether it's trains. But our children are eloping, and it's resulting in many deaths. So next slide. 5 tips to help prevent wandering and wandering-related behaviors. Secure your home. And what I mean by secure your home, get an extra deadbolt or another lock with a key. Now, I've worked with a family whose daughter actually jumped out of a window to elope. So you have to know your child and what safety precautions you can put in place. Get a tracking device. Tracking devices, AgelSense, Project Search, through Avante's law that was just passed, the bill that was just passed. It's going to provide funding to different law enforcement agencies just to provide these tracking devices. Our children need them. Consider an ID bracelet for your child, or identifier on a picture, on their picture ID. Teaching children how to swim and alert neighbors and first responders. Next slide. 7 tips to prevent wandering at school. If your child has an IEP, which more than likely he will have one, although some children have a 504, ask them, what is their safety plan? Let them know that your child, if they don't know already, he's a runner, right? Call them runners. And he wanders. What safety precautions are you going to put in place? Do we have a crisis safety plan if my child is overly stimulated or has a meltdown? Because he might run. Write the teacher, let them know to always inform you immediately when your child wanders away, not hours later, not the next day, immediately. And carefully document all wandering-related incidents, because there might be a pattern, and you need to figure out the pattern. You know, make sure they conduct a functional behavioral assessment. You can't, next slide, you can't eliminate all triggers, but again, through a functional behavioral assessment, you can possibly figure out the triggers and program in replacement behaviors. And you can possibly alter some things in the environment. Next slide. If your child is old enough to venture out in the community on his own, like my son is, he is 21, and he navigates the community on his own, I always, every morning, he goes out to school, I pray over him, he attends community college, but after that prayer, I make sure that he has certain things within his wallet, like his ID, money. We have a safety kit that includes an extra battery and his charger, because if he's disoriented or lost, I need for him to be able to contact me. We've also traveled together to make sure he understands different routes home, because our children love routine. They might only follow one route home, but there could be several routes home, and you need to travel those routes with him. Remember, you're creating different pathways through routines and repetition. Provide what would you do scenario. Again, Our children might have a difficult time shifting their thinking. They might be a little inflexible in their thinking. That's what the restrictive and repetitive interest, and that's why they love routine. Create what-if scenarios, and we go through those every single day. Like, if your phone dies, what do you do? If you're on a particular street and you don't know exactly where you are, what do you do? Who can you ask for assistance? Who shouldn't you ask for assistance? Make sure your child is wearing an identification bracelet or has a picture ID with identifier. If my child runs into law enforcement, this is what I tell him to do. If they stop him, my son Eli has difficult time processing information. He processes information slower than others. If they're asking him questions and he can answer them, answer the question. If he cannot answer the question, then tell that person, you have autism. And you keep repeating, I have autism. Can you repeat a question? Can you rephrase the question? And I'm programming that into him so that whoever is encountering or interacting with him knows automatically that he has autism. He chooses not to wear ID bracelet. There is a certain dignity in choice, and that's fine. But he does have a tracking watch because I have to make sure that he's safe and that he comes home with me. I also decided to take him down to the police station and introduce him to the sergeant, introduce him to the chief and other community resource officers because I wanted them to know his face. If you see him in the community, know he's just not trying to disturb the peace. He's just going to and from school. He's going to the store. If you see someone bring him into the police station, know his face. That's Eli. And I'm even creating a program with Norfolk Police Department to support the police officers when they encounter children with autism, because many of them haven't encountered children with autism. And some of those behaviors that our children display mimic, like the stimming, might mimic someone who could be on drugs. And it was just a child in Arizona who was thrown to the ground because he was stimming. So these interactions are real, and we have to find ways to protect our sons. Next slide. If you're interacting with someone with autism, they may appear distressed, especially if they're lost or if they're overstimulated. They might be laughing or giggling or ignoring you. They might not be able to make eye contact. Please stay with the person. Please stay with them. Next slide. Just give them space. Give them space. Don't interrupt if they're stimming, don't interrupt them if they're not hurting themselves. Next slide. Avoid any quick movements or loud noises. Don't touch the person unless it's absolutely necessary. So stay with that person until you can get a first responder or neighbors, or if he's a person in your community, make sure that person is safe and hopefully they get back to their family. So I just wanted to say we're going to the thank you slide, and I sped up because I know we have questions. If you want to learn more about autism, please go to Moms of Black Boys United website for additional resources. There's also the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders. That's a long name. However, they have so many resources on evidence-based practices. We also have the Ohio Center for Autism and Low Incidence Disabilities, VCU's Autism Center for Excellence. I want everyone to promise me they have free modules and courses on autism. Please visit these websites. Take a self-guided course. It's for free, so that you can learn about different strategies to help support someone with autism. And again, if you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Facebook, and I'll definitely assist you as much as I can, because as I said before, no one truly grows out of autism, and our children are going to need support, and I want us to rally around our children as they venture into adulthood and out in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was very informative and enlightening. And I just want to say thanks also just for the whole campaign that you and Kim have been rolling out this month. I've really enjoyed hearing from different moms, as an autism mom myself, hearing from different people along the journey of having a son with autism. So I just want to thank you so much for all of the work that you put into this, and I hope that people will take advantage of the resources that you've developed. Kim, did you want to say something?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kimberly Alexander, and I just wanted to take a moment to first thank Nicole for about 5 months ago just kind of jumping in feet first with me. We didn't know each other from a can of paint, like she likes to say. But she trusted me, and I trust her wholeheartedly, and I'm thankful and I'm grateful. Please continue. This call does not end our campaign. We will be rolling out more information, more tips, more safety ideas throughout the rest of the month. We have a Facebook Live that happens every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. There is one today at 6 p.m. in the group. Please tune in. And we also have infographics that go up every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We appreciate all of the feedback, the support. If you have questions, concerns, ideas, please reach out at specialneeds@mobunited.org. You can reach both Nicole and I there. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we want to open it up for questions. If you have a question, don't forget to unmute yourself by dialing *6.
Hi, Develcia. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there was a question in the chat group, and I'm not sure if everybody can see the messages in chat, but they were asking, how do you find services in cities that you don't know, such as I think his godson moved to Orlando, and she's in Chicago, and she wants to give them somewhere to start for continued assessment and services, and he's 8 years old.
So what you can do is, Google's my best friend. So what you can do is you can start, because you have local branches of like Autism Society of America, Autism Speaks, or when you go to your doctor, express your concerns and let them know that, these particular behaviors are concerned and I would like to get my son evaluated. So from Google and finding different organizations, you can also reach out to your pediatrician, who will then refer you to specialists.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions that people would like to ask Dr. Nicole or Kim, or just talk about your child?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Angela Okaku, and I'm a single mom with a child with autism. And my question is that I would love to know if anyone in the group know of any legal resources to help in terms of advocating for the child's rights that have been, like say, in an IEP, that have went ignored.
What state are you in?
Wisconsin.
We would have to research, I think, because everything is state by state. So I'm here in New York, so I've come to know like the resources available. There are different organizations who advocate on your behalf or who connect you to a resource to advocate. So I don't know if you're connected with any parents groups in your area, but usually I learn most of the things I know through other parents, like on listservs and email lists, things like that. Nicole, do you have any thoughts on that, on how she can find that in Wisconsin?
In Wisconsin, I would have to research, but I do agree that speaking to other parents, because more than likely it's not just happening to your child, if they're not following, because the IEP is a legally binding document, and they're required to follow it. So if they're not following in your son's case, and more likely they're not following in someone else's case, connect with different parents, connect with multiple parents in your area.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe try to bring attention to it. I just remembered I have a friend here who has a son. Her son actually has Down syndrome, and she is an attorney, so she is a legal resource herself. But even with being an attorney and going to the school and advocating because they weren't fulfilling his IEP, she didn't get the results that she wanted, so she actually went to the media. So depending on how extreme the case is, if you have other parents who are in the same situation, she actually got a local TV station to do a story about how they weren't serving his IEP needs and were just kind of leaving him in a room to play on an iPad all day by himself.
Yes, that is very informative. Thank you.
This is Kim. I just wanted to add very quickly that, like Nicole said, the IEP is a binding document, and built into the IDEA law is a due process regimen that you can follow. So just know that you most certainly can seek out legal assistance, but there is a built-in resource to the parents that are involved in the process for you to advocate independently. And I would encourage you to kind of just Google IDEA and what your legal recourses are that you can independently follow in the process.
And I just want to piggyback off of that for a quick moment. You receive, every IEP meeting that you attend, you're supposed to receive the Parents' Rights Guide. And in that Parents' Rights Guide, it actually outlines the due process procedures if you don't agree with the IEP team. Because honestly, nothing happens with that IEP. Nothing is supposed to happen unless you sign to it and you agree to it. That's why they have that signature page here. But if you do disagree with the IEP team, there are other remedies, and you can find them in your Parents' Guide and Rights. And it's given to you at the beginning or end of an IEP meeting.
Thank you, everyone, so much for their input. This has been an ongoing battle for me and myself, and I don't want to take up your time with the matter. But I have connected with a lot of resources here in my community of Wisconsin, and my son basically was forced into homeschooling and have not been able to participate in a natural school setting since he was in kindergarten. He's now 10 years old. For the first 3 years, it was really rough. But I take what you're saying, and I'm going to be sharing his story later today on the MOBS page. But it's still a work in process. Thank you.
Thank you. What's your name so we can look out for it?
Pete? I'm sorry, Pete?
I was saying, what's your name so we can look out for your story?
Angela Opoku.
Okay. Thank you, Angela.
Yes, but do we have any other questions or comments?
I have a question, but I don't want to take up the time if somebody else has a question because I can call Nicole.
Please go right ahead, DePasha.
Okay, so my question is about meltdowns. You mentioned it a few times in your presentation, and my son has periodic meltdowns like 90% of the time. He's fine, but then he'll get in this period for a few months where he's just having meltdowns. And I wanted your advice on how to handle it because my husband and I have pretty much developed a system of, like, how long we're going to stay places. Like, everywhere we go, there's, like, an element of fear. So if we go to the playground, okay, we're only going to stay 30 minutes. If we stay longer than that, he might have a meltdown. And if we go to church, let's see how far we can make it. I'm always the more optimistic one. He's like, let's leave at noon. I don't think we should push it past noon. I'm like, no, I think we can make it to 1. I think we can make it to the end of the service. So there's this constant management of our time and how we navigate the world. Like, we're looking for cues because there's, like, a look on his face that he gets, like a sad look before it's about to come on. So it's like, okay, well, we're not going to go to the grocery store if we see that look. So everything in our life is shaped by, managing whether we think something bad is going to happen. So I just wanted to get your advice on that.
That's a great question, DePelsha. So then I'm going to ask you. Remember I said that all behaviors have a purpose. Do you know what the purpose? He's having a meltdown for a reason. Do you know why?
Not really. And we've done, like, all the things you said, like with the functional behavior assessment, with, they give us these data sheets to track, but it's been hard to, like, pinpoint one thing that triggers it, like, or a time of day or a situation. Like, there's not any particular thing. Sometimes we're in a noisy crowd, and he's fine. Sometimes we're in a noisy crowd, and it bothers him, So it's been hard to figure it out.
Okay. So if you've been documenting the times of his meltdown, then, like I said, for me, I applaud the fact that you're continuing to take your son out in the community, because if it is a situation with him responding to the stimuli from, the sound, what's happening, what he's viewing, or the smell, then you have to continue to try to desensitize him to these things. And like you said, pushing that time, you're doing a great job of pushing that time out. You're recognizing triggers and possible cues, so that's excellent. And you have to just continue down that path. If you already documenting his meltdowns, continue to document, because you might see a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And how old is he?
9.
He's 9? Okay, not exactly at that time of puberty yet. But it could be something else underlying going on. I don't know how often, if you take him to a neurologist or if you take him to a developmental pediatrician, because there could be another co-conditioning happening at the same time. Remember when we looked at the slide?
Right, yeah.
In the co-condition? So something else might be underlying there.
Mm-hmm.
And you just need to figure out, we're the detectives, we figure out what it is.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'll talk to you more later.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions or anything someone wants to share?
Hi, this is Arnita Christie calling. Take my.
Go ahead, Arnita.
I just want to say thank you so much for this call. My son is 18. Will be 18 in June. And when he was younger, he wasn't termed autistic, but he was termed that he had ADD and they wanted to do all these things, and I fought it. Now pushed forward to, and he's math is his favorite subject. He wants to go to law school. So I was really identifying with a lot that was said. Now, I'm at a point where I forget that, and I know it sounds crazy, but I forget that he's somewhere on the spectrum. And so when he does certain behaviors, I'm ready to chastise him in a certain way. And then this call has really been a phenomenal reminder. I apologize. It's been a really good reminder that I can't treat him like I treat, like every other child. But the reason I'm asking is now, he's 18. He will be going off to college. I've not kept him in a bubble, but I understand where he is. What thoughts or what kind of information can you give me to help once he's out of my realm, once I can't touch him, once I can't say, okay, I see that you didn't get enough sleep and you're kind of acting this way. And he's the tactile person. So him and my husband will go into these pushing kind of things where, he tries to put, and he's now at a point where he can push my 200-pound husband. We bought him a punching bag. So I'm just trying, I apologize, I took up a long time to get to where I'm going. I just want to know, what can I do now that he's going to be out of my sight? Does that make sense?
Oh, no. That's an absolutely great question. So your son is at the age of majority, and he's ready to venture out on his own and go to college. Is he going to go away to college?
Yes.
Okay, he's going away to college. So now, going away to college, being out of your sight, you have to now plan for him. If he's punching and he's pushing, that's sensory information. He's getting that sensory input that he needs. So now you're going to have to replace that sensory input, because when he's out on that college campus, he's not going to be able to punch anything. He's not.
Right.
So now you're going to need to find a replacement behavior for him, whether or not it's a sensory tool, maybe something he could squeeze while he's in a stressful situation. And many of our children do go on to college, but where they're seeing the most stress is not with academics, because they'll be strong academically, but with the social interactions.
Right.
And how to navigate that social landscape is so complex and it's so difficult. So that can produce stress, and your son can't punch anything, so possibly talking to him, listen, what else can you do other than, push or pull? Because you're not going to be able to automatically flee a situation. You're actually going to have to sit. So maybe a stress ball for him. Maybe he needs to take a break. Ask him, does he realize when he needs to take a break?
Okay.
Can he go somewhere to find, someplace where he could sit down and just gather his thoughts? So now you're planning in. Remember pathways, right? You are creating different pathways to different calming strategies for your son.
Okay.
But we can talk more, because it's a daily thing, and it's a daily process. And he might call you every single day, or he might not, until he gets his routine down, these different pathways.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you plan, for the mom who were just speaking, do you plan to go to his school and talk to his teachers and let them know that he's on the spectrum?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I have something to admit that I'm not very proud of. I've never told my son that he's on a spectrum, and I've never told any of his teachers that he's on a spectrum. And it was a decision that we made because we didn't want him treated differently. May not have been the best decision, but now I don't know what to do with that now, because now we're at this point. So I'm open to listen.
No, and I completely understand. I just, like I said, I knew that my son Gabriel was on the spectrum from the age of 2, but now he's just getting diagnosed at the age of 12 because he had questions. And your son, he probably has a lot of questions too, especially if he's having a difficult time socializing, especially if he has adverse responses to different stimuli. He probably has questions, but doesn't know exactly how to form them. So, yes, it's that time. Did your son have an IEP?
No, because they, quote, unquote, said, they wasn't bad enough to get any services. And so what I did was, and I don't mean to take up time, but what I did was we started paying for stuff, and I would take him and bring him into social settings. Yes, he is challenged with social. He doesn't, quote, unquote, have a best friend. He doesn't have kids that will call him and say, let's hang out, because he's very, he talks over people. We pull him back, saying, you got to listen to people. You can't control the situation. But, yeah.
So my suggestion to you, from one mom to another, you have to tell him, because he has so many questions. I mean, relationships are critical, especially to young adults. He's going to want to know why certain people might be avoiding him, or why certain girls might not want to talk to him. He needs to know. And actually, I know that someone mentioned about going to school and talking to his teachers. You really can't do that. FERPA laws. He's at the age of majority, and you don't have that right unless you have guardianship or conservatorship. You don't have that right to speak for him unless he gives you permission. So you can't go in there and say, my son has these challenges. No. That's a violation of his rights as an adult.
Oh.
Yes. FERPA laws. I was hit with that. And I told the teacher, I already know. And my son gave her the teacher the cue to say, oh, you can talk to my mother. And I'm like, okay, cool, we're good.
Right.
Okay.
And I know some schools, like my son, and my son goes to college, so one of the things that they taught you during freshman orientation is like your son, has to give you permission to talk to the teachers or whatever, and that's because of that law or whatever.
Okay.
So have the conversation. That's
okay.
what I'm
Thank
saying.
you
Have
so
the
much,
conversation.
everyone. Mom,
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I think it just illustrates, every situation is different. Like the quote that you said early on, Nicole, like if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, is really, really true. And it's, for me, one of the most frustrating things about being a mom with autism, because people make so many assumptions. If you say you have a child with autism, well, is he good at math? Well, does he do this motion? And then none of it is usually true. So I just end up having a series of frustrating conversations. So I really don't even like to talk about it with people who aren't in it, because they don't understand. And even though they're well-intentioned, they end up saying something that just really annoys me. So I just typically avoid the conversation unless I'm in a safe space. But with that, we are officially out of time. I want to let everyone know that the resources are available on our website. Also, this call and the presentation will be on our website in the members-only section of the site. So if you haven't already joined the organization, please go to mobunited.org and do so that you can access this and all of our other previous presentations, and definitely check out the resources that Nicole has put together for the site. So we're going to wrap up and close out with a prayer by Lisa Spriggs, and I encourage all of you to have a wonderful weekend. I think spring has finally sprung here, hopefully. But thank you all for joining.
Yes. Okay. Dear God, hear the prayers of a mother's lament for a child who's from heaven sent. We don't know where this child went, lost in a world that was never meant. Guide my walk every hour I'm awake. Don't let me give up when there's no more I can take. Keep me from feeling my anxious heart break. Oh, help me through this journey for heaven's sake. Give me the strength to endure each day. When he's aloof, distressed, has nothing to say. Teach me, oh God, how to live a new way. I will stay on my knees for strength, I will pray. I'll hold him close whenever he cries and encourage him when he really tries. Don't let me continue to ask why, for we'll get through this by and by. Oh, righteous God, please hold my hand. Let me see your footprints in the sand. Hold me up when I'm too weary to stand, and help me live each day by your command. Let us love our child like you love us, so we will not lose heart. Let us love our child like you love us, so we won't fall apart. Bestow on me the deepest love that is true. Help me to love the same way you do. Amen. Have a great day, ladies.
Amen. Thank you, everyone.
Amen. Have a good day, everyone.
You too.